I'm going to try to let people in as I am able, but in the meantime, I'll give a warm word of welcome. My name is Catherine Carlton. I'm Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestre Canada. I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length, pandemic-length gray hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a colorful shirt today. I'm speaking to you today from Peterborough, Ontario, the land traditionally known as Nogojiwanong, the place at the foot of the rapids. Orchestras Canada and its team live and work on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations. They include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We acknowledge that the Williams Treaty First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity. Now, as I prepare and research a land acknowledgement, I so often realize that land acknowledgements, we really are referencing water as often as we are referencing land. Water is fundamental to our lives, bringing us life and beauty. How ironic then that so many First Nations communities are under boil water advisories, including Curve Lake First Nation, a mere 31-minute drive from Orchestras Canada's offices. As you go about your day today, I invite you to consider your own access to water and learn more about clean water access in First Nation communities near to you. At the end of the conversation, I'll paste a useful link into the chat if you'd like to continue your learning in this way. So I'd now like to give thanks to a number of people, starting with members of Orchestras Canada's Equity Committee, chaired by Daniel Bartholomew Poyser, and including members Parmala Atariwala, Chris Dirksen, Cheryl McCallum, Allegra Swanson, Dinuk Wijaratne, and Vicky Young. These people have worked together over a period of years, in some cases, helping Orchestras Canada strengthen our work in the areas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And the committee has been particularly focused in the last number of months in helping us determine things that we can do to help promote Canadian orchestras' engagement and good relationships with Canada's Indigenous peoples. This is the second in a series of conversations that we're hosting at Orchestras Canada, and we're absolutely delighted and honored to be able to do so. Today's session will be very much a conversation. I had the privilege of participating in an initial discussion to get ready for this session with a number of today's speakers participating. And I must say, it was like being with a group of very old, very smart friends. That's not an ageist thing. It's just a matter of the intimacy and the depth of relationships that these people enjoy, and the respect that they have for one another, and the keen perspectives they have on their work. It will be a 90-minute session today. A reminder to participants, rather audience members, to keep your video and audio muted. There will be a question and answer portion near the end. We encourage you to use the chat function, and I see that many of you are already exchanging messages in chat. The discussion will proceed in English with live simultaneous interpretation. You see the directions in front of you. There's also closed captioning in English from rev.com, which may help if you prefer to see the words in front of you. Lauren has already, I believe, pasted in chat instructions to enable the simultaneous interpretation, view the French slides, and enable the captioning. We will be sending links to a recording and summary resources in French and English in the coming weeks. I think with no further ado, enough from me. It's my great delight to turn the microphone over to Chris Dirksen, who'll be hosting today's roundtable discussion, and she'll be introducing you to the remainder of our panelists. Thank you so much, Chris. Welcome, distinguished speakers. We are honored, we are delighted, and we look forward to learning from you. Thank you so much.
Howdy, my name is Chris Dirksen, and I am half Cree and half Mennonite, which I like to call a Creenanite. I come from Northern Alberta, Treaty 8. My dad, he comes from North Tall Cree Reserve, and my mom's side is Old Colony Mennonite from Lacrete, Buffalo Hills, Alberta. I currently live in Toronto, Takaranto, dish with one spoon. For my day job, I am a cellist performer, composer, and musical director. And I also sit on OC's equity board, and I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm going to give us a little bit of information, background information to how we came together. There's a group of us that came together in 2019 at the Banff Center. And this all happened because Renelta at the Banff Center, she's our Indigenous programmer. She asked me, Chris, what do you want to do? And I was like, you know what we need is we need a community of classical Indigenous musicians, because we are currently all working in the field, but all very, very separately. So I brought us all together, and we spent 10 days together really talking, going deep, deep, deep into all of our shared history, all of our shared experiences within the institution, within the educational system. And we came up with a document that's called the Musical Sovereignty document that came out with all the OC things. So please feel free to go back and read the Musical Sovereignty document. I also want to recognize that there's just a panel of us that were together in Banff, but we are not the only classical Indigenous Canadians in the room. So I want to acknowledge all of our peers that are not on this panel. There are quite a few of us now coming out. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing us and sharing our experiences, and then we're going to get into conversation. And basically, this is going to be a full conversation between us. You folks feel free to chat. I'm not going to look at the chat personally. I want for me to be involved in the conversation. And then at the end, we can look at the chat and answer some questions. So I'm going to go with the person I see on my left side. So Beverly Mceiver, introduce yourself, please.
Buju, Megwayana Quatindago, Bishiko Kong, Mamitogoji with Tigwaning and Donji, Mashkate Bijike, Nadodem, Nishinabe, Nawe Naguabe, and Dao, Bejik Mede. Hi everyone, my English name is Beverly Mceiver. I am a member of Black Soul First Nation and of the Buffalo Clan, and I am speaking to you today from the small town of Sioux Lookout, Ontario, which is in Treaty 3 territory, roughly midway between Winnipeg and Thunder Bay. So I am speaking to you from within my ancestors' homeland, and I am wearing black dark frame glasses, have dark brown hair and a single braid down the back with two prints from Amu Anjakaneb over my shoulder and a gray dotted sweater. I am a violist and composer. I can't make a full announcement yet, but in the fall I'll be working as an assistant professor of composition. And Sarah to share a bit more details in the coming weeks. But for now, I am also a community health worker and presently a freelance musician. So thanks all for listening to us today.
Awesome, thanks, Melody. I totally forgot to do the accessibility of what I look like. I also have big rimmed glasses, the kind of aviator style. I'm wearing a black cap that is has the Toronto Tower on it. I've got two braids. I'm wearing a black shirt. I also have headphones on so I can hear you all in this conversation. Up next, my dear friend, Andrew Belfort.
Fancy, Ani, bonjour, greetings. My name is Andrew Balfour, which is my settler name. I originally come from Fisher River First Nation in southwestern Manitoba, but I was born and raised in Winnipeg. I was 60 Scooper, Treaty 1 territory, but Manitoba, of course, is the traditional territory of the Ojibwe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dene, Inuit, the Métis. but I'm speaking to you actually from Barrie, Ontario, which is the Anishinaabe territory. They're here in Wendat, but I too currently live in Toronto, and I've just actually spent some time up in northern Ontario, in Shabananing, which is known by the settler name of Killarney. So I've had some great experiences up north after being locked down for the last year, which has been crazy being in Toronto, but suddenly being up on the land has been very joyful and gives my spirit great joy. I am a composer, sound designer, singer, choral conductor, amongst many things. And I have to say, this has been a very, very busy year for myself and some of my colleagues, but in a bizarre way being online. So it's an honor to be here, Chimigwich.
Thanks, Andrew. Up next, we have Ian Cuson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Cuson. I'm wearing a white button-down shirt and sitting in this cozy gray chair, which I love, in my office. I originally come from Penetanguishene, Midland, which is on Georgian Bay on the Great Lakes in Ontario. I'm from the Métis community there, and my father is French Canadian, my mother's Métis. And, but I currently live in Treaty 14 area, which is just outside of Toronto in a town now called Oakville, Ontario. And I'm a composer. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I have to say, it's awesome to get back together with this incredible group of colleagues and composers and musicians to talk about these important things. Thanks for having me. Thanks,
Ian. Michelle, I haven't seen you in so long. You look so great. Nice. You're up next.
Thanks. It's great to see everybody. My name is Michelle Lafferty. I am a mezzo-soprano artist newly venturing this world of music. So it's really exciting. I'm working with amazing people. I have long dark hair and I'm not wearing a so fun shirt. It's just a black little shirt. And a little sunburnt from the weekend. So imagine that on my cheeks. I am currently in Treaty 8 territory, but originally from Treaty 11 Northwest Territories, Ray Edzo. And yeah, I'm excited to be part of this panel. And it was a total eye-opening experience being part of this group. And when we were in Banff, and then from there, I graduated from my master's and now I'm on this journey.
Amazing, Michelle. We're so proud of you. Beverly Mceiver, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beverly Mceiver. I'm currently living in Ottawa for the past 30 years on unceded Algonquin territory. I'm originally from Northwestern Ontario. I grew up in Dryden, Ontario, and I am a member of Laxo First Nation from Obishkokong, which is close to Sulikout. I am a pianist and a composer and collaborator. And today I am wearing glasses, as I always do. I'm wearing headphones. I've got a navy blue cardigan over top of a dress that you cannot see, but I've got tulips on the dress in honor of living in Ottawa.
Amazing. And we can talk about your beautiful flower project later. And Sunny Ray Daywriter, who has the best name all the way from, he will say. Yep, next.
Hi, I'm Sunny Ray Daywriter. So I'm Blackfoot, and I'm in Treaty 7 territory, and I'm on traditional Blackfoot territory. I'm wearing a black hoodie and a black cap. And so I'm in my home studio. I got my piano behind me. So I like to say I play piano. I'm not really a pianist, but I'm a composer by night, and I'm a youth care worker with child protection by day. So yeah, I'm currently in my, I just finished my first year of my master's in music composition. So I'm in my thesis year, so it's gonna be a lot of work, and I got a lot of side gigs on the side. So pray for me that I can manage my time. So that's me.
We gotcha. We gotcha. And our last panelist, Jessica Mcmahon, you're plus who you are.
Okay, Danse. My name is Jessica Mcmahon. I am in Blackfoot territory, a town of Cochrane, which is outside of Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary. I'm Cree. I'm from Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan, but born and raised in Mohkinstsis. I am also a product of the 60s Scoop. By day, I'm Indigenous curator of public art for the city of Calgary, and in my spare time, I work as a dancer, musician, and composer. Oh yes, and I'm wearing blue glasses. I'm wearing quilled black strawberry earrings, and I am wearing a mustard yellow top with a beige background. There's some like paintings in the back that are blue colored, and a music stand.
Thanks, Jessica. Nice to see the bling. All right, so let's just get into this. I think like if we can all unmute our mics if we want to. And for our audience members, you'll notice that our introductions took a moment. You know, it took a little bit of time. So I think one of our topics that we wanted to talk on is the subject of Indigenous time and what that means to us and how that works within creation processes. And I thought maybe a good way to start this whole thing was to share a really good story that Ian has of how Indigenous time worked for Ian in a collaboration recently with the Calgary Opera. Take it away, Ian. Let's hear a good story of collaboration with an institution.
Yeah, thanks for letting me share this. This was actually an experience that I got to share with Michelle, who's right beside me. We were invited by the wonderful Marion Newman, who many people know, mezzo-soprano, and she had the opportunity to curate and put together a project, a new opera project. And in January and February, we came together for 3 weeks to create a work. It was super interesting because it was sort of this shocking experience, and I think shocking because it was so different than what normally happens. But you can imagine we were all on these 6-hour equity days, 6 days a week, and we would take the first hour of that 6-hour day to do a check-in. So we were in a big room, obviously all socially distanced and masked and all that good stuff, and we would sit in a circle and we checked in with one another. Where were we at that day? We were all away from our homes. How were we feeling? Those times were filled with tears and laughter and opportunity to grow closer as this little found community that we were for a short time working together. And I think, you know, we think about time and we think about the cost, I think, of orchestral rehearsals and how much an hour of musicians' times cost and how quick we are to be on the clock and how important that is, certainly with union restrictions and all that good stuff, which we can talk about later. But what was so unique about this is that our contemporary society would say that was a really wasteful use of 1 of 6 hours in the day. But I have to say, and Michelle, I think I'd love to get your perspective, but the kind of work that we made in the next 5 hours was something we never, ever could have done at that level of quality, of that level of interconnection as a group, had we not spent the 1 hour of wasted time. So I think just this idea of interrogating how we use time, how we use rehearsal time, and was something that we just, I don't know, we were able to explore a completely different methodology for it that is maybe more traditional than the way we normally do it in most artistic spaces and spheres.
Totally. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and just being part of that process was very uplifting, very nurturing type of process, and building relationships right from the start. Like, we all semi knew each other or meeting new people, but you got to build that base of the relationship and how you're going to grow. And we set values for the whole process of what we want out of each other. And like, there was respect, there was patience, there was humility, kind of bringing the human into the work. And yeah, it just, and I felt like it grew faster and had more depth than any other project I've been part of. So I think it was a great, another experience other than Banff. Like Banff was had similarities to it as well. So it's just kind of nice being involved in a project where everybody was on the same page and you had a voice. So
yeah, and when we're thinking about, you know, the concept of Indigenous time, you know, what came out of this, both of you guys talked about the aspect of building relationships and how building relationships actually takes time. It's not something that is done instantly. It's not something that's done overnight. So when we're working with, when we get commissions, when we're working with orchestras, when we're working with chamber groups, it's about building those relationships, and those relationships aren't necessarily instantaneous. And also thinking about time, like how long does it take to write a piece? How long does it take for a person who's in their master's to write a piece? How long do we have as Indigenous folks to write a piece and get it performed? And how long does the orchestra have to perform that piece or to learn that piece? Because that's a big one. Often, you know, I feel like with new pieces and new music, and this is across the board, new music doesn't get the same amount of attention and time as necessarily older works do. And also the players kind of often know the older works. They've learned them from the start. Andrew, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think also that, I mean, these are great we've had great discussions in 2019 in Banff, and even though we had 10 days, I still don't feel it was enough for us to understand our own individual relationships with orchestras or so-called classical institutions, but also our collective kind of experiences. And one of the things that stands out, particularly since I guess the big springboard year was 2017, when it was this settler country's 150th anniversary of colonizing. And suddenly we were getting all these commissions. And I feel that for orchestras, essentially, particularly in the Eurocentric model, the hierarchy is quite difficult to navigate, even for experienced composers. And I think it comes down to programming as well, because most of the times, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but in terms of particularly, I guess, the major orchestras, not just in Canada, but in North America, on Turtle Island, a lot of the maestros, so-called, or the conductors are European. And even with the best of intentions, you know, they'll, you know, wanting to commission a local Indigenous composers, but it goes down to what we're just talking about, Indigenous time, is that we might not want to write in a total Eurocentric traditional way. We might want to experiment. We might have our own ideas how to extended string techniques or wind techniques or percussion. And I just feel that if you feel that you want to program an Indigenous piece or a new piece, and this is not just an Indigenous problem, a new music program with Stravinsky or any other European piece, is that I think that there needs to be more exploration in the new music. Most orchestral musicians know how to play Stravinsky. And I think that, yes, it's always problematic with time and union time and the expenses involved. We were talking about this in our pre-meeting last month, is what a glorious thing would be if it's not just the conductor, but also the musicians to be able to learn what we're trying to say. It'd be great to take them out to a powwow or a feast on the land, and you know, of course, but that just seems ridiculous to many people that don't understand the relationship we're trying to do. And I also feel that, like, it's just, I've been colonized since I was 6 months old, taken away from my blood. So I'm feeling, you know, in the last 10 years, 15 years of my career is just trying to refine my identity. And I just happen to do that through orchestras or mostly choirs. And I do think that the landscape is getting a little bit better, but we have a lot to do in terms of relationships. And who are the gatekeepers? Are the gatekeepers the orchestras, or are we the gatekeepers? If an orchestra wants to do, you know, so-called an Indigenous themed piece, then I would say we are the gatekeepers. But if I wanted to do a piece about the fall of Berlin or the Russian Revolution, then I would say that they would be the gatekeepers. But it's a difficult conversation, but I think that we're on the right track. And I really feel that, you know, this idea of gatekeepers is a very difficult one. And I think that there needs to be a little bit more listening, but we also have to figure out this hierarchy thing, because I think that if you're going to program music, you really have to sort of think about more than just like, we've got a grant to commission this composer. We've all been there on this table. And then suddenly when it gets to rehearsal time, it's like, okay, your 8 minutes are up. Let's get on to the big marquee work. So I think that we have a long way to go before that.
Yeah, totally. Does anyone have anything to add? I'm gonna keep going on this topic that you brought up of like of the story and the gatekeeper. There's several different hierarchies of gatekeeper even in it, but when we're talking about orchestras commissioning Indigenous works, what do we want as a committee? What did we want as Indigenous people? Well, for us, when we came together, if an orchestra is going to commission a piece that's about Indigenous issues, Indigenous leaders have to be at the top of the leader ladder, if we're calling it a ladder. It'd be better if it was cyclical, a circular kind of hierarchy, but it has to be a leader that is Indigenous, that's telling the story. When we write our own pieces and we write our own music, we are often asking ourselves, are we the right person for this job? Are we the right person to tell a story? Our nation is so giant, and we come from so many different nations within our giant nation, and we all have different experiences, so like, I am not necessarily equipped to tell a Micmac story, but Jeremy Dutcher totally is. So who's coming to the table when you're creating a commission, and is it we can't just put an elder on it. We talked about this in our gathering, but we have seen, you know, we're around, we see a lot of things, we sit on a lot of arts boards, we see a lot of grants come through, and they're like, we've talked to one elder. And one thing that is fully truth is not all elders do not get along, as all humans do not get along. So coming to one elder for an Indigenous story stamp of approval might not be the way to go as we move forward together, building a relationship together. Anyone have anything to add?
I'll also add that I've actually seen sitting on juries instances of what I would call elder abuse of non-Indigenous organizations taking advantage of our elders. I'm thinking specifically in instances where elders might be asked to collaborate in kind of a librettist sort of context in presenting these professional works. But then when you look at the budget and you see the amount that's set aside for the elder to what a librettist would be paid on any other project, and it's a fraction of what another arts professional would be getting for the same project. I think there's actually a lot of precedents for exploiting Indigenous stories, exploiting our elders, even when apparently like steps are being taken to include us. If we're not being valued at the same level as any other professional that you'd be working with, then that's something that's of grave concern for me, and it feels more exploitative than anything. So we need to be aware that our elders are actually being compensated fairly for the stories that they're bringing to the table.
100%. And recently, I was talking to my friend Merrick. He's in a band called Nihiwak, and his mom is an elder. And I was like, "Well, can we bring your mom into this project?" And he's like, "You know what? She's got elder burnout. She's spread too thin." And I would definitely encourage orchestra leaders and to go into your community and find out who's in your community. Regina has a Indigenous advisory committee, and you don't need to have an Indigenous advisory committee per se, but reach out to your own community, find out what land you are on, find out who in that land you can build that relationship. And remember, it takes time, and it's not going to be like the day before a grant is due or the week before a grant is due. To be fact, These stories are rich and beautiful and share what this country is all about, and it takes time. Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that relationship component and having that token elder. That's something that I see a lot in my day job as well. And I think that there's been some interesting things happening where people, you know, we don't have an advisory committee in public art. Because that doesn't give any agency to Indigenous voices either, because often advisory committees just give advice and it doesn't necessarily have to be followed through with by the organization. And so what we have is a guiding circle of artists and elder artists, artists who are elders, elders who are artists, youth, and it is representative of the Calgary community. So we have people from each of the Treaty 7 nations, as well as urban Indigenous folks. But it's not, the target is not to have a representative from each nation. It's to look at the composition of artists within the city and building those relationships. And then the discussions that we have then turned into actions that public art has to follow through. And so this was started after what in Calgary is known famously as the Beaufort Towers incident. And after that, there's this, you know, it's an external group. It's run by an outside consultant, but I have to listen to what they tell me to do. But it's not necessarily them telling me to do something, but we engage in deep and meaningful conversations. And the membership changes and it's fluid and it's not looking for that one big R representative from a nation, because often we can't big R represent our nation in that way because we're people. Not all of us will agree on things. And I think that if you look for that, a different type of model than an advisory circle with big R representation from each nation, and you look for people and artists and Indigenous individuals who are wanting to engage in these conversations, and then that they're paid for their time. We pay our guiding circle members CARFAC rates to read papers, to read calls, to sit in on meetings. You know, they get paid those CARFAC fees for each meeting. And if it goes over, then we pay them more. So it's not like we have a set amount, we can only meet for 2 hours or whatever. It's a continuous relationship building thing that's happening that I think is really beautiful and a really good example to go forward. I sit on advisory committees and I don't necessarily enjoy them. And I don't feel like I'm responsible to be a big R representative of the Cree people, because I know that there's other Cree people here and we have different ideas on different things. So there's also that I don't, you know, don't look for the big R representation really, unless you go to other systems of leadership. People who do have that responsibility of being the big R representation on matters, which even then that's contested, I think, you know. So I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about that, but that's sort of my experiences that I'm speaking from, and a process that I really enjoy. And I didn't set this up. So you know what, that's even better. It was a bunch of non-Indigenous people who set up this guiding circle because they wanted a better relationship with the local Indigenous artists in Calgary and area. And I get to benefit from that now.
Sorry for interrupting. So the big R in this conversation is relationships and relationship building. Like, this is what I've been doing for my entire career, is making friends with folks in that love music, that love Indigenous music, that love classical music. But how did we get here? I'm going to shift gears a little bit. How did this table get to this point? We needed a bit of education to get here, and education's a big, sticky subject. Before you can become an orchestral player, you need quite a bit of education, and education comes with a price. To be a cellist is not a cheap hobby. Growing up, I grew up with the Edmonton Public Schools string program, so I grew up with subsidized learning for string instruments. But I want to, we all have like similar and different various degrees of education knowledge. And I want to point our topic to education and how can we get more Indigenous folks to our level. Anyone want to start?
This is something I think a lot about because I recently left this position and I'm now working in public health. But I spent the last 2.5 years working as kind of a culture support for First Nations high school students that are coming from remote communities in Northern Ontario where they do not have high schools of their own, and these youth are forced to fly south a good 800 kilometers into Sioux Lookout and to move into strangers' homes and to um, beg for scraps at the educational table where they've already been set behind 3 to 4 years because of the quality of education that is offered to them on reserve. And then they have to leave home at 14 or 15, away from their parents, from their families, or their support networks to live mostly with strangers. Sometimes they do have family in Sioux Lookout. So my job was to be a support for them. I wasn't a teacher. I desperately tried to make a music program, and we actually, for once, had decent funding to invest in instruments for the program. But what we didn't have the space and investment for was time and staffing and capacity, where my job title was mental health and music was an afterthought. So though that was my skill, there was only so much time in the day that I had when there were competing priorities to work with youth. And what I see across the board is that there's definitely a really strong interest of music and arts education from the youth. There's so many other things happening in their lives. And again, I really need to emphasize to the audience what it means to leave your home for 8 months of the year when you are 14 years old and you cannot live with your parents because people are unwilling to pay for a high school in your hometown. There's just a lot happening, and many things happening in these young people's lives, and I believe like that the arts is a lifeline for many, but often there's just so many other competing priorities that they don't have that level of access. And so when I'm talking about this level of educational disparity, it's just things that people in urban centers take for granted, which is graduating high school when you're 17 or 18 years old with a university level, with the qualifications to start off in a university, let alone a college program. And so these youth are often like pushed through as quickly as possible just to get the bare minimum of a high school diploma because our graduation rates are so low, and it's because the educational capacity is just really far behind. And I know for myself, the amount of time and investment it takes to become a musician or a composer and playing at a kind of a professional orchestral caliber is significant. And so people that know me in this community always say like, oh, well, don't you want more people to be like you? I'm like, well, yes and no. But I know that I can't work that type of intervention by myself overnight, because if it takes you 20 years of private lessons to become a professional violinist in an orchestral setting, like one person coming in can't offer that in a 6-month program, in a 6-day program. So we're severely handicapped. And I think it was Alan Gray Eyes who pointed this, who made this remark to me, but we um, thinking of like the major national institutions, like not to single out the National Arts Center, but we have all of these large organizations across the country that are dedicated to the advancement of performing arts in Canada that have had decades of sustained funding, and we've never seen that level of sustained funding for any sort of national Indigenous bodies. So we're thinking through on how it's not just a single handicap at maybe like the public school level, but like there's these institutional handicaps as well where we've never um, it's a 50-year head start that the orchestras and everything else have in terms of the amount of funding that Canada has put in since probably 1967, before my lifetime. And uh, and like thinking through to where if we can just get these kids through high school and into a post-secondary music program. Like for one, you need to convince the post-secondary music programs to give youth a chance that haven't had those 15 years of RCM piano lessons and like their grade 8 exams and whatnot, because for them just making it through high school in one piece is a testament in its own. And you know that love for music is there, but sometimes we need to be able to play catch up to fill in the gaps a bit more. We need to reevaluate kind of like our pedagogical standards where working in remote Northern Ontario, the last thing I expected was to be walking into the high school music room and seeing this like skinny 15-year-old kid banging out Rachmaninoff sonatas on the piano, completely self-taught. But like sometimes that, like, I question it. Like that passion for classical music sometimes is there, but I think many of us know what the expectations are to be kind of like a classical pianist, and like how competitive it is to get into that field when you're fighting against 50 other high school students going to a performing arts high school in downtown Toronto with access to all of the best teachers. And like a kid from Northern Ontario is not going to have that same level of advantage. Or music literacy is definitely a challenge too, where we might have hands-on application with our instruments, but and not to say that we can't do music literacy, but I think it's a certain level of patience that you're asking of these teenagers to one, be self-taught and wanting to play music, but then also have to sit down and kind of learn how to read the notes, especially if your fingers are moving faster than than your brain is going with the notes on the page. Like there's just so many different box that you currently need to check to be able to fit into this classical music paradigm, and like the odds are just like really significantly stacked against many of our youth. And I mean, I think systemic racism and poverty are many of the major functions, because poverty wasn't my experience growing up. My mom's on the call. She can tell you how much she spent on my instruments and, and private lessons. But I was fortunate enough to be raised in Ottawa and have access to these resources, where now as a high school worker in Sioux Lookout, I know that these resources just do not exist. And that even though a generation later there should be more options available for our youth, I know that I had access to more as a teenager than the teenagers that I work with now.
Totally. That's so many good truths in that. The social economic realities of classical music is so huge, and from my experience was quite the barrier to get to where I am. And so it's like about understanding that. It's about understanding where we are from and where we come from. And if you want to commission us, we've got to come on equal ground, on equal level, and allow us to speak our truths of what we know within this. Does anyone else have things to say about education? That was really amazing, Melody. Thanks. Beverly, do you got anything?
Maybe I can talk about my musical journey a bit.
Yeah.
I was adopted, so I didn't grow up with my biological family. I grew up in a small town and had music lessons from about the age of 8 till about 16 when my music teacher retired. So that was pretty much the end of my training, and I didn't go on to university or anything, but throughout my life, I've sought out opportunities to take private lessons and go to workshops and participate as much in music as I could as a musical volunteer at church, and from time to time accompanying. So for my child during their exams, for example, is one way. So I think, and I think the interesting thing is that I've been able to kind of select from a buffet of what I wanted to study. So I wanted to study jazz, and then later on when I was released from my 9-to-5 job, I was laid off. That's when I decided to focus on music. So I think that there are a number of different ways to pursue musical enrichment, I'll say, as opposed to education. And I think that because I haven't been involved in the traditional education system, it's given me some freedom to pick and choose the type of projects that I want to work on, because there's not really any expectations placed on me, so I can kind of do what I want. So I think that I'm a piano teacher, so I don't teach any orchestral instruments. Piano is the only thing that I know. I haven't taught any Indigenous students. I have a studio where I have a few students. I think the last year has taught us a lot about teaching online and what's possible in a variety of ways that you have to adapt in order to be able to teach. It's not just, it's not necessarily just showing and demonstrating anymore. There can be other components involved too. So I've taken part in workshops where there was improvisation, there was movement, there were all kinds of possibilities presented. So I think that in order to reach people who don't have opportunities to participate in the traditional means of learning, there's ways to be adaptive and creative and find ways to present musical training.
Totally. Beverly, you remind me that like everyone has a voice, and every voice deserves to get heard. And our training doesn't really matter. Cuson does not have a degree in composition or in music at all. And I have a cello performance degree, but not a composition degree. Ian, yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, I think just to add on to Beverly, like the idea of late bloomers is also something that we need to continue to remain open to. Yeah, I did a year of conservatory piano playing and then no additional school beyond that. My undergrad was in English literature. So, but the idea that, I'll tell a funny story. There was an organization that I was trying to get membership within as a composer. Can probably figure out which one it was, and made an application. This was about 5 years ago. And they told me, and I should tell you, I'm turning 40 in a couple of weeks or a couple months. So I was in my mid 30s, tried to become a member with that organization in Canada, and had all the requisite information, had submitted the scores required, and I was asked to consider getting more education, and I could apply to be a student composer. And this was, I was receiving some commissions at the time and having performances of my work. And I realized, yeah, like from a CV perspective, people didn't have the time of day. It was like, you're not the mold of what the Canadian composer is. And it's funny that only after, becoming the Carrefour composer at the National Arts Center, thanks National Arts Center, people actually started to take me seriously. And I was like, I'm the exact same person I was 5 seconds ago when you didn't have time for me. So that, I think, is that is an example of the kind of, well, a risk taking that organizations can take, because that was a real risk that they took, but also how we can have additional barriers. And I think other equity seeking people can have these barriers, and non-equity seeking people that just don't have the education can have these barriers as well. And we have to become more flexible and creative as to how we look at talent and musicians and composers and that sort of thing. So
totally, and this goes straight into gatekeeping. So let's roll with the idea of gatekeeping. Andrew, do you have things to say about gatekeeping?
Well, I just like I just to finish off that last what Ian was saying too. I don't want to get in I don't have any degree at all, actually. Of any undergraduate. I dropped out of school because I wasn't ready for it. Mind you, I went to school in the early 90s when I felt that the institutions had no idea really how to so-called teach how to be a performer. It was all academia. And even my friends that were taking composition at the time, I felt it didn't interest me at all. I didn't even imagine going to be a composer when I was going to university. I think things have gotten a little bit better. But again, that idea of the institutions, they're the gatekeepers. And it's also the level of entitlement and privilege of sort of thinking, we are teaching the most superior form of music making on the planet, you know, and Beethoven and that idea of sort of this, all the greatest music, well, the rest of the world actually knows almost nothing about what we think is the great music. Most of the world does not speak our musical language. And I think that has seeped into a little bit more how we perform and how we recognize our classical music. And again, I'm using that word, I don't like it, but I think it sort of, you know, the way that, are we the gatekeepers, or are we taking part in gatekeeping of this particular style of music? And I think this ties into what we were just talking about, what Melody and Beverly and Ian were talking about, in terms of, do we want to educate and bring children from the North and nurture them as much? Yes, we do. But I still think the landscape on the classic, I mean, in terms of the audience and what it's going to be in 20 years, and what's the repertoire we're going to be performing in 20 years, that needs to change. Because I think the audience that supported that 50 years ago has changed very much now and will change very much in 20 years from now. So I think that I think in a lot of ways, my experience was working with orchestras, and I have to do my own shout out here too, for being from Winnipeg, and the support that the Winnipeg Symphony gave me and the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra was really vital for me in terms of, like, I didn't have a degree, you know what, really, I think they took that chance because I was Indigenous, or I had something to say. And I think that whether, you know, in terms of like, that was my opening, and I was in Winnipeg, so I was pretty isolated. The only other Indigenous composer that I knew of at that time was Barbara Kroll. And I only met her because the symphony brought her into Winnipeg, and I didn't know there was anybody else that had anything remotely like my experiences. I was ignored by other composers and professors. And I feel that right now, my experience sort of in the past little while has been, I mean, especially meeting like people like Chris and Jeremy and everybody else, Ian and Beverly and Sunny and Jessica and Michelle. Like, you know, these are after Banff in 2019, I came back and had a new perspective of how sort of we as a community are very, very, we have something to say. And, you know, we wouldn't be having these conversations 50 years ago. You know, I mean, even 50 years ago, it would be rare for, you know, we wouldn't see any women conductors, let alone any person of color. You know, and the landscape has changed so much pretty quickly. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that females weren't allowed to play in the Vienna Philharmonic or the Berlin Philharmonic. So, I mean, these changes have been slow. But I mean, I still want to go back to this idea of like, we're not in the area or the reality where we can just be artists and write whatever we want. We're still labeled and categorized as Indigenous composers. And that's the mainstream media in a lot of ways. How many of us have sat on a radio show or been interviewed, and what does it feel like to be an Indigenous composer or an Indigenous musician? You know, I'm a musician. I'm Andrew. I'm not, like, you know, I don't write traditional Indigenous music. I feel that there are still levels, and it's not just one gate, it's many gates, and orchestras have many gates. You talk to the administrator, and then you talk to the music director, and then you talk to, you know, the conductor. And, you know, there's so many gates to get to that actual talking to the conductor. We're not allowed to address the orchestra when they're rehearsing. It's always, you know, so who's the gatekeeper there? It's obviously the conductor. We can sit in you know, in dress rehearsal, and we can listen. And if the conductor has anything to say, he'll turn around and ask us, but maybe you have something to say to the oboe or the string player. And I know we've had experiences like that. And I know that it's important for us to be able to communicate with musicians. In the choral world, is a little bit better. You know, I think that it's because it's a different structure. But I also feel that it's also the basics, that orchestras and administrations and the people that run the halls all need, because they're the gatekeepers as well, to be trained about protocols and to provide a safe space. You know, that's the important thing as well too, because if the idea for an orchestra is you want an audience to come in and experience music, but, you know, and you want to make them feel welcome in their seats, and they have to have their program and they have refreshments and stuff like that. But as an Indigenous composer, I've seen people go backstage and security hassling them. I've seen it. And I think that's an important element to what we're talking about too. I think I've gone a little away from the gatekeeping, but I think it's important that orchestras are so large, and there's so many elements involved and arms of an orchestra to make that experience positive. But there still needs to be, and an orchestra say, well, the security is not my problem, or the ushers are not my problem. Well, they're your frontline workers. They're the ones that are going to, we're only now being accepted as legitimate artists to, to be accepted by orchestras. But if you want Indigenous people to come in and celebrate, oh, there's Chris Dirksen, there's Jeremy Dutcher or what have you, or any one of us, then you're going to have to make them feel comfortable coming in and not have to worry about wearing a tuxedo and not having to worry about clapping between movements. The protocols need to be changed to make Indigenous people feel welcome to come and experience, and not just Indigenous composers. Maybe they'll love Wagner, maybe they'll love Bruckner. Chances are they probably would, but you have to make them feel welcome, and you have to work on the protocols to make them feel welcome. I know many Indigenous people in schools in Manitoba that they're bussed down and they get the great experience and they're gone, but they never come back. Why is that? Why do they never come back on their own? If they're in Norway House, which is 8 hours from north of Winnipeg, and they've already been and seen the orchestra, and the teacher says, what do you want to do when you go back to Winnipeg for this weekend? It's always the mall or a Jets game, or they never want to say, I want to go back to see this, symphony orchestra. We have to work on that as well. That also is education. So sorry, I went on a tangent there.
No, that's exactly what I was getting at, actually, Angie. That's exactly why I asked you that question. I wanted to get to this idea of like being welcome, back to relationships, the big R here, being welcome within like even the symphony building. We've had experiences where when we come backstage for a rehearsal, we're not allowed in, and kind of, you don't look like a composer, you don't look like you belong here. We've all had this experience. So we've got to work, like institutions as a whole have to work on all levels of the relationship building with Indigenous people, of where you are and who you're working with. Jessica, do you have anything you want to add?
I think just to continue on, like, how do we make a safe space as Indigenous creators and other Indigenous creators? Because I think like the academy and the educational system, I think as Indigenous people, we have a different perspective about music, and it's our ontological beliefs about music. And I think like a lot of the Western Academy is not ready to hear that a lot of the time. So it doesn't create that space. So it doesn't make it accessible. So I find like a lot of Indigenous people as creators, because we're artists naturally, it doesn't create a space. So I think that kind of wards people off a bit. So I don't know what I'm getting here, but that's what I'm trying to say.
Totally. And like, I think that's like why we're all here is to try and create that space for all of us to work together, for us Indigenous creators to work with institutions on all levels, to create music that is actually representative of Canada. And that's for Indigenous folks, also for folks of color. I feel like Canada knows, orchestras know that their programs and their houses do not represent what Canada looks like or what Canada sounds like. And I think we know that we've got to work on that. Cool. So we got another like 10, 15. We talked a little bit, but the last question here is, what do Indigenous creators want from orchestras? Like, let's throw the pie to the sky here. Andrew, I think you were talking about feasts. Like, how beautiful would it be for a musician, a soloist, Michelle, to come in with an orchestra and have a meal with the players before going into rehearsal? How beautiful would that be with building the relationship together? What are other really like beautiful ideas that we can throw out to folks on how to create safe space for us and for them?
I'd like to speak to that. I think for me, I'm a huge advocate for Indigenous cultural safety training, and that really goes to the roots of the problem, which is that everything is based on this type of anti-Indigenousness. From the roots of the founding of this country, and it seeps into everything: governance, education systems, into the ideas of, my neighbors down the street who lock their car when we walk by, even though they know that we live here and we're not going to steal anything. So Indigenous cultural safety training is anti-Indigenous racism awareness training, and it can really go into the deep roots of your organization and sort of start changing it from within, and help build those safer spaces, especially with your frontline staff. I've experienced everything that people have mentioned here already. Going to the local orchestra concerts. Even now, I don't go because the experiences are so terrible. It will help with educational institutions, classical music institutions, where, we face racism from teachers, from staff, from security, being harassed around practice rooms, from directors of those schools not really supporting Indigenous students or their claims about racism or bad experiences. To security in your locations, to individual orchestra members, right up to the board, who makes these decisions and sort of directs these directions, and general managers, everybody. The Indigenous cultural safety training, I think I've seen it work in healthcare systems. I've seen it work in schools that I've worked in, but I don't see any classical music institution really, from my experience, looking for that type of work. It's very, you can ask us to compose and you can commission us, but is the actual space safe? So my dream would be that everybody's engaged in this deep Indigenous cultural safety work, so that it also then trickles out too, like, because we're looking at inherent racism within systems and structures and individuals, then it also makes it better for everybody else, other racialized people who are encountering similar problems to us within your institutions. So that's just me, though. That's my huge, I'm always say this all the time too, because I really believe in it. So yeah.
Perfect. Melody, you got your hand up.
Yeah, this is something that I think we touched on quite a bit in our Indigenous musical sovereignty statement, but given that we have a really wide cross-selection of orchestras on the call today, one of my foundational questions is, how many Indigenous composers have you actually commissioned in the last 5 years? Because we definitely have an emphasis on often commissioning new works, whether international or Indigenous, and but it's not sufficient. And like, if we just need to look at the short list of Juno Awards for orchestral works, like every year, there's almost always something that's kind of quote unquote Indigenous inspired, which is usually shorthand for like, what can we steal from the Inuit people in our classical compositions. It's become a bit of a trope at this point, especially like an exoticization of throat singing without giving throat singers proper uh, credit as the composers of whose works are actually being performed. Because I think it's still a very, because personally, like, I'm increasingly working more and more as I guess like an art music composer, and I have yet to receive any orchestral commissions. Like many of us on this call, I don't think have done a lot of orchestral writing, because it's bigger and more time intensive, and there's this hierarchy that we put into place. So I mostly focus on chamber works for now, because that's the commissions that are coming in. It's definitely something I would be interested in pursuing, as I'm sure many of my peers would, both on and off this call. But when we see who's getting commissioned and performed within Canadian orchestras, which I think would be the ideal developmental ground for Indigenous composers to hone our craft and then have like international premieres as well, I don't think that's fully happening yet. And if our repertoire is underdeveloped at this point, it's because we haven't been given the opportunity, we haven't been given the foot in the door. And with the amount of time that it takes to do orchestral writing without promise of a premiere at the other end of it. It's not something that we're going to do on spec unless that commission is actually put in place. So I think that's one of the major shifts, is just to give Indigenous composers work.
Yeah, y'all want us in the room, but but to what degree? So I said don't put an elder on it, and I'm also going to say don't put a throat singer on it. My friend Lakaluk, who lives in Iqaluit, who I work with quite a lot, she's like, it's so often that there's a just add Inuk art section in a piece. So there'll be a full written piece, and then you just fly down some throat singers and add them into that one section. And that's not, again, the big R word, that's not real relationship building. That's not real community engagement. That's a paycheck. What else? Ian, Michelle?
I was just going to say, oh, sorry. I was going to say, like, the reality is, let's be honest, with the orchestras that are on this call, which is should be all of them in Canada, most of the commissions that happen for composers for new work are like the 3-minute to 5-minute opener piece, right? So let's, if we think of a program, it's fairly low risk. And so why not take more risks with that? And if a composer feels like that they need extra support in that, there are mechanisms whereby we can support composers in that. Like, we have our own internal community where we can encourage and support one another in the writing or in like drafts of it, and or you could provide that support if that was desired. So I kind of think it's like, yeah, it's low enough risk. It's not like we're not asking for the hour-long commission. And those aren't really available.
Yeah, speak for yourself.
But the idea is that we are a community, and there is this inbuilt support, and it's amazing how we can communicate and how we will be like, I'll proofread your score for you. Like, we got that, so I think I think orchestras can take more risk on those 3-minute starter works.
Definitely. Melody, did you have your hand up again?
I was taking it down, but yeah, just to build on Ian's point too, I mean, definitely throwing the 3 to 5 minute kind of overture, like miniature sort of format for orchestral writing is a great starting point. But as we develop a repertoire, it can't stop there, because I mean, COVID kind of took out like the Beethoven 250 or whatever year of programming. But if we're programming symphonic works, I mean, the opportunity eventually needs to be extended, that if we're interested, invest in like the symphony as an art form, to also let composers do big post-romantic hour-long multiple movement pieces as well, and give us that genuine consideration as well. And I know it's always a balance for the classical staple repertoire favorites, the Beethovens and Brahms and whatnot, and the living composers, but the scales need to tip at a certain point if we actually want to be invested in like ongoing dialogue and supporting living people.
And we are all well versed in grants and grant writing, and we all are all well versed in Canada Council's agenda of promoting Indigenous artists. So we know that there is money out there for that in particular. Yeah, keep going. Let's do another 5 minutes of this, and then we'll do like 15 of Q&As.
I'll say really, really fast, and then Beverly, you speak. The other interesting thing that a lot of people don't know is that we often sit on those granting committees. We sit on, like, when you have a core funding request goes in, it's probably one of these people in this call that is going to sit on that committee at the Canada Council. And I think one of the things I just say to that is, when you read a lot of core funding requests from large organizations, you start to see where that kind of commitment to equity and diversity is sincere, and where it falls really flat and short. And so I think that's the interesting thing, is that we often are asked to assess how organizations are doing with this kind of work. And I just one memory that I had really quickly is our time in Banff together in 2019. We opened up our circle to add a bunch of the choirs that were present, and they kind of came in and talked. And one of the things that one person said to us that ran a big choir in Canada was like, we're forced to have you guys be a part of this if we want to get our core funding. And I remember going like, what? Like, and I hear that, like I hear there is that forcing, it's a requirement in this for your core funding or whatever it is. But it's that kind of approach to it that when you read that in a grant application, that is like quite awful. And I don't know, maybe there's some good work to do it well, do it honestly. You might still have questions about how to do it well, and just do your best and do it with sincerity and true desire for engagement and relationship building.
And relationship building. And also, we're all friends, we all talk. So if our names are on a grant and we don't actually get the work when you get the grant, we also know that. So just, you know, be honest with us and with yourself and with your organization on where you want to go and how you want to do. Michelle, I haven't really heard from you. Give me like some pipe dreams of how you want to shine light on the Indigenous classical world.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be brought up and have traditional classical education and having opportunities and being nurtured by the right people and working with the right people. Not that I haven't had bad experiences, but ideally, just from the beginnings in Namoyut in Calgary, just the way that Calgary Opera supported us, but let us lead what our schedule is going to be like, what kind of programming or what kind of work we wanted to produce that day, and no pressure. That's kind of what I want to see, like what we were talking about earlier with having an Indigenous person at the top of the ladder. Like for someone like me who has experienced some negatives from this industry, I don't want to be your token Indigenous person to be put in and then also told what to wear. Like throw on some beaded necklace or earrings so you look more Indigenous on stage. I'm like, I don't want that type of environment. So just again, building that huge relationship, like I know we can't do it with COVID, but having a meal together, opening up and getting to know each other. And I think setting values isn't, like what Ian was saying too, isn't a waste of time. What's wrong with bringing the human into music? Like, yeah, I mean, that just open space and let you be creative, whether you want to show more of your Indigenous heritage or not.
True. We have to say goodbye to Andrew at the moment. He's got to go off to ceremony. Do you have any last words there, friend?
Yeah, I actually have two. I have two last words. One is just that also just think very carefully when you want to indigenize classical music, like, you know, whether it's the Rite of Spring or Peer Gynt or whatever, you know, some of the things, like be very careful. It doesn't necessarily do your cause well, you know. I think that's important because I've seen it way too often in the classical landscape, particularly with the Rite of Spring. It's a noble, and it's a noble thought, but I think you have to be very careful because it doesn't quite work in my mind. And the other thing is, I think I hope this gets mentioned in the Q&A, but there's a book out there for every person, and then that's Hungry Listening by Dylan Robinson. That's a book for everybody. It's more a book for non-Indigenous people in the classical world. I know probably most of the people on this call have read it. It's a very heavy read. It's dense. It might be difficult. It was for me because there's some hard questions, but I think that's a book that everyone in the classical music scene, not just in Canada, needs to read because it's very, very important, I believe. And I think Dylan is a good friend, but also I think it's very important for everybody to read that book. Chimigwich, thank you very much, Chris and everybody, Orchestras Canada, for listening to us. I look forward to continue this discussion in the future.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Ciao. I'm going to throw it over to Sunny Ray, day writer. What do you want out of classical? Where do you want to shine the light? you're just finishing your master's here. What do
Yeah.
you want in the future? Tell us about that.
I'm not too sure what I want in the future, but I know one thing going through my master's, as opposed to my undergrad, going through my undergrads and music training, like we weren't supposed to question the system, like music theory, how it's built on white racial frames, and how we're like caused to sit like in this neutrality. But going through my master's, I was able to be more critical about my positionality within Western music and how I engage with it. So I think I'd like to see orchestras and the institution in general to take that kind of self-reflexive stance with themselves, right? And to understand that Indigenous perspective of music, which is my thesis, is different, totally different than Western music, right? And how we engage with it. So, and just to be mindful of that too, when we work with non-Indigenous musicians, composers, and how maybe sometimes, again, to the question of gatekeeping, how we can refuse where we don't want to tell you everything, right? And we don't have to smudge with you if we don't want to, because, or, to let you in on these ceremonies, because it's for us. So I guess that's all I have to say right now.
Amazing. Beverly, do you have anything that you would like to add? We're running a little bit on time, just going to mention that, but I
want to give a quick shout out to organizations like Orchestra and the Systema inspired organizations, because they build values into their programming, and it's a very equitable method of training that's welcoming to everybody. So I think my big wish list would be to find a way to offer opportunities, like let's have an Indigenous youth orchestra. We know that there are players out there and we're looking for them as well. So that's my bucket list.
I fully agree. I am writing a piece for Systema in Edmonton, and it's like blowing up my heart because I'm getting to work with 15 little Indigenous little wee guys learning how to play the violin, and we're gonna write a song together. It's the cutest thing ever. Jessica, I think you're last on what your dreams of the classical world will be. Indigenous will be for you.
Yeah, as aside from the Indigenous cultural safety, I want to play, but I never get to, because I'm constantly told I'm not good enough. It took me 12 years to get my Bachelor of Music and 3 institutions, and I want to play. And going back to what Beverly said earlier, you have to make your own opportunities. Yeah. And that's what I did, because I didn't have any opportunities in school during my Bachelor of Music or during my Master's of Fine Arts. And so I did. And I ended up playing with an orchestra, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so my dream is that Indigenous people who want to play in orchestras can play in an orchestra, and that we can get beyond this false meritocracy that holds a lot of people back.
Very true. Also, you could just write symphonies with you as a soloist, Okay, let's go to a question and a Q&A, because we only have 10 more minutes. But I'm going to go straight back to you, Jessica, because this one's relevant to what you just talked about. Where can organizations get more information about Indigenous cultural safety training?
Yeah, so Sanyas is a BC-based Indigenous cultural safety training group, and they work across all levels of government. And they really focus on that at the roots of what Canada is, which is anti-Indigenousness from the beginning. And they work to help people understand their own participation in it. It's a non-shaming process, and Indigenous people in your organization do not have to take it. They have a separate program for it. Currently, it's available in certain provinces. I think there's a note in the chat about that. And good news that it will be in Treaty 7 hopefully soon. I'm working with them, with the City of Calgary and with Calgary Arts Development Authority to commission a curriculum specifically for Treaty 7 and area arts-based Indigenous cultural safety training. So I'm hoping that we can formally announce that in the next few months, but that will be available for people. And I really like the work they do. I've worked with people who took this training before I knew that this training existed. And the work that I did with these non-Indigenous individuals, it was such a refreshing thing to work with somebody who's been through this intense training. And constant. It's not something that you just take once and are done with. You have to continually take their course upgrades and their courses and continually question yourself and work on yourself as an individual. There's also another one based in Salish lands, Decolonize First. They also do Indigenous cultural safety training, and there might be one in Ontario, possibly.
Totally. My wife actually works for Senyas, and this is another cultural team that she works for, Challenge Accepted, based in Ontario. But, you know, with Zooms, we all know how fast we can go from one part of the country to the other. Thanks. I'm going back to these questions here.
I just wanted to quickly jump into that. I occasionally do consulting work as well, and I want to say that there's dozens of Indigenous consulting firms across the country at this point. So my advice is, wherever the question is, like, just start asking around and do the work in your own area, because there's many different Indigenous peoples across this land, and chances are there's some excellent consulting firms like from the land from which you reside. And I think it's important to really get that tailored knowledge too, the understanding of the land that you live on. So there's the broad understanding of the Indian Act and colonialism and the treaties and residential schools, but then you need to take a closer and find out what's happened to actually the land that you've lived on. And I'm willing to bet that there's probably half a dozen service providers in the region wherever people are asking.
There's a question here on protocols about smudging. And smudging, many Indigenous people wish to smudge prior to being on stage. Have you encountered any barriers to this? Would an artist safety agreement requirement help? So there is a smudging document that I think Lauren has available that she can put into the chat here. I don't necessarily know if a safety agreement would help. I know that you know, if you're working with IATSE and there needs to be a security guard there, then there needs to be a security guard there. But smudging is super important. And the smoke alarm has never gone off in my 40 years of smudging on stage. And I have a lot of electronic equipment, so I really do appreciate the smudging. Does anyone have any quick smudge things? Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Okay. Reflections on how the theme of reconciliation could be a piece in an orchestra, could become a piece in the orchestra. Does anyone have any thoughts on that other big R word that we didn't really talk about?
I think it's there if a composer wants to speak to that theme. Personally, I'd probably run screaming in the opposite direction from a reconciliation commission, but I think that's also a piece where like settler composers can also be thinking about how to improve on relationships, because we've held up our share of the bargain and shared all of the land, and in result we don't have drinking water. So your turn.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. I think like let's throw this back to non-Indigenous composers to actually compose about reconciliation. Beverly.
Sorry, I don't know how to get the raise hand icon, so I'll just do it that way.
I got it.
I think that reconciliation is also built into the things that we talked about earlier, the time and the relationships, and taking that time to understand the work. So I think whatever people are writing about, then taking that time to understand where the composer is coming from and what the context is very important.
Totally. Anyone else? Hey, we have one more question about youth orchestras. Reflection on youth orchestras' role in decolonization, decolonizing music, education, and access. Just a question mark behind that. Collaborations with youth orchestras with appropriate protocols are in place, and Indigenous people's time and valued is compensated. Definitely Indigenous people's time and values, Indigenous people's times need to be compensated for their value, and I think youth orchestras is a great way for composers to get their teeth, sink their teeth, sink their teeth into composing for a larger ensemble. So I also think like the youth orchestras, because we're working at a high level, but not like NAC level, it's a great place for soloists to come in. It's a great place to bring in young composers and young soloists, Indigenous soloists, and let them have a moment to shine. Does anyone have any other ideas for youth orchestras? Ian?
Yeah, I think like also youth orchestras are the place where I think there's a lot of potential with youth orchestras to be starting to catalyze change or making the professional orchestras look different, because it's kind of the entry point. I've observed in youth orchestras just it's like the breeding ground, or that sounds wrong, the training ground for the professional orchestra, which is what it should be, of course. But it's like inculcating all the values of the professional orchestra, good, bad, and ugly, at a young age. So why not think of it as a different space? So could it be a place where you have more talent that is from equity-seeking groups represented? I think that would be a really interesting place. If we can't, shouldn't be starting this in the professional orchestras. We should be starting this work in the youngest people, in the youngest people present. So I just feel like there's such a great opportunity, and I'm not seeing it really being grabbed onto, at least from my vantage.
Totally. And then we have 2 minutes left for one last question, and it's a bit complicated. I'm curious how the tools of music, be it classical or others, can help Indigenous youth strengthen and grow in their ancestral, contemporary, spiritual, ethical, social commitments. To speak the truth they want to speak, how do we create spaces to talk about the inherent strength of the classical music tradition and take up what is appropriate for our unique cultural needs? There's a lot in that. I feel like if you want to make space for folks to speak their truth, then make the space. Create the 2 hours create the 4 hours that are necessary, bring people together, give them a snack, give them food, give them, if we're talking about youth, give them like a Cineplex coupon or something. But if you want to create the space, it is up to you to create the space. Does anyone else have any other thing? We're right on 3:30.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in there briefly. I mean, I shared a lot about Indigenous youth experiences, and I'm old now. I'm not a youth anymore. I'm somebody that works with youth. I can only speak from observance on what I saw working in a specific high school serving youth from 5 First Nations, and those youth are not a monolith. And I've seen some questions pop up on what do Indigenous youth in Canada want? I'm like, that is too big to ask. It's the same as asking what do youth in Toronto want? There's going to be many different youth wanting many different things. So we're speaking specifically to those dynamics of youth that are interested in classical music performance, and they do exist, but I also don't want to be going out on this big, gigantic classical music recruiting drive, because I think that's also really problematic, and it kind of reinforces some of those hierarchies. And I'm also addressing systemic racism across the board, because the youth in the area where I live in, they live in a very real fear of being murdered and pulled out of a riverbank when they're taken from their homes at 15 years old. So we're starting from a very different frame of reference here when discussing Indigenous youth in the country, because most of the kids that sit in the National Youth Orchestra of Canada are not going to high school worried that they're going to be murdered on the way home. So it's a very different reality. These are two different countries that we're talking about. So I just want to make that clear. And yeah, we don't have a lot of youth on this call either, and we can't speak to them as a monolith, but I just want those that are interested in music to be given a fair chance, even if they don't check all the right requirements.
Cool, cool, cool. We are just past our 90 minutes, so I think I'm going to throw it back over to Catherine. Thank you so much to the audience members that came to listen to us talk about things that are really real to us.
And on behalf of the audience members, thank you to our panelists today. I feel as though that feast that was referenced earlier has started thanks to your generosity. Jessica, did I see your hand going up?
Yeah.
Is there something you'd like to?
Yeah, I think this is, I know we're over time, but I really would like to address this from Janine Island. Sound is not owned by any one person or culture. New writers should be inspired to use melodic content of Indigenous nations to create new works. I'd like to see more dialogue on how to do this respectfully in instances where it could be seen as infringing on intellectual property. This is one of the last questions, and I think this is really important because we've talked about this a few times, and I'm sorry for interrupting. Because our sounds and our culture are owned by us. We have cultural sovereignty over our own sounds, and they're not to be mined for another person's benefit. And it's not something, and you know, we don't have intellectual property rights. In the States, we do, I think, in some places. But I don't think that should ever happen, ever, unless you're collaborating equally or working for an Indigenous person. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say, but I just wanted to address that quickly.
Yeah, cultural appropriation is fully unacceptable in this day and age.
And I will draw people's attention again to the statement on Indigenous musical sovereignty that is published on the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance website, and that it was the product and the brainchild of these people and others working together in Banff a couple of years ago. In fact, that was my gateway, talking about gatekeepers, to Chris when I read it and got goosebumps, and then started a conversation with Chris, who has continued to help to open doors to such conversations as we've had the benefit of today. Jessica, thank you very much for interrupting me. I really appreciate you didn't interrupt me. You added immense value to our experience today, and I'm so pleased that you addressed that before we wrapped up. This has been a remarkably generous time, a time of courage, and a time of leadership and speaking your truth. I feel, again, I have goosebumps for the privilege of being in your company as a collective of artists and leaders in across this land. I hope that we can continue the conversation and deepen our collective understanding and move towards a place when cultural safety is understood and is something that you need not fear, we need not fear, where we have the opportunity to walk together in respect and in good relations. Just a couple of quick reminders. We will be sending out a recording of today's session to folks, as well as some follow-up resources, including some of the ones that have been flying through the chat as well, thanks to the recommendations from our guests. And we will be doing a follow-up survey. Please let us know what you think. We're keenly interested in knowing how we can sustain these conversations and continue the learning in all humility and with great respect. And we look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thank you again panelists, to Melody, to Ian, to Michelle, to Chris, to Beverly, to Sunny Day Ray Ryder, to Jessica, and as well to Andrew. And thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing with us today. Such a great privilege. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good. Bye.